Well, that was all about doing security right. And thank you, Vijendra Sharda, for collaborating with us here at the Dynamic CISO Summit 2022. Now, if I were you, I'd keep my mobile active while you're watching the sessions and type away on what you're thinking at LinkedIn and Twitter. Now, hashtag CISO Summit 2022, that's where you need to head towards. And until you manage to get AI to do that typing for you, it's going to be you doing it all by yourself. But our next session is all about exploring the potential of AI beyond just for automation. Akhilesh Tuteja, the KPMG Global Leader for Cybersecurity and Consulting Practice and the Head of Digital Consulting Practice in India, will be in conversation with Tarun Kumar, the CISO at Nissan Digital India. Let's listen in.
Thank you so much for your warm introduction and pleasure to be here. And Akhilesh, I'm quite looking forward to having an energizing session with you. For the audience, I should probably state that I've known Akhilesh for as many years. I've been in the industry, and to me, he is a trusted entity who I can lean on for all good reasons. So I think with this high, we'll get into our discussion on artificial intelligence in cybersecurity beyond automation. And before I come to you, Akhilesh, to seek your insights on various different aspects, let me provide some context to this discussion. And this is largely from the perspective of what the CISO see, or I'll provide for the CISO's perspective, from a global standpoint. We are all aware that cyber attack surface in modern enterprises is massive, and it continues to grow rapidly. And this is especially when majority of organizations around the globe are accelerating their digital transformation journeys by adopting cloud, digitization, automation, right? Largely for a business modernization perspective. And I think it depends on the size of the organization. There could be hundreds of millions of events per second that need to be analyzed to accurately calculate risk. And this essentially means that analyzing and improving an organization's cybersecurity posture now is beyond, a human intervention problem, right? It's beyond the human scale problem. And it is in this response, to this unprecedented challenge that artificial intelligence-based tools for cybersecurity have emerged, with an objective to help the cybersecurity teams reduce the risk of breaches, improve the cybersecurity posture effectively and efficiently. And since these AI-based technologies aim to quickly analyze millions of events that I was alluding to, they help identify and stop cyber threats, right, with less human intervention. And they claim to identify different types of threat, ranging from malware to risky insider behavior. And I think one of the characteristics that we hear about the AI technologies is that they learn over time. They draw learning from the past, and therefore they're able to identify new types of threats. And I think they build histories of behavior, on users, assets, network, and therefore they're allowed to detect and respond to deviations, from the established norms. So therefore, very, very, clearly, there are two sides or two facets of AI. One is automation, and the other one is the predictive security aspect. Automation is something I think it's fairly well understood and also adopted. We have SOAR, which is security orchestration, automation response, platforms that, many of us have evaluated and kind of adopted as well. But I think it is that aspect of predictive security that is very less understood, or I should say not widely understood. This is where that aspect of continuous learning from experience, these the terminologies, that we get to hear about on the predictive side of AI is expert systems, machine learning, neural networks, deep learning. I think, these are all subsets of AI. And, this actually gets me into the first question to you, Akhilesh. I think it'll be good for the audience to understand in some bit of depth about the predictive capability of AI. Now, how do these technologies store domain-specific information? What are the mechanisms they use to gain knowledge? acquire new knowledge, and how is it knowledge put to use?
Thank you, Tarun, for that wonderful introduction. I recall the good old days where we started to work together, and you're right, we have known each other for a very, very long time, and I've always treasured our association. I feel grateful to Rahul and the whole Dynamic CISO and Greyhead Media team for bringing us together on this wonderful platform once again. Thank you so much. I love the way you kind of contextualize the way AI is growing, the need for AI in cybersecurity. To answer your question specifically, how does AI sort of get into predictive capability? I do want to say that we as humans have always been fascinated and eager to know about the future. If you knew what your tomorrow will look like, I'm sure you will feel great about it. Although many people, philosophers, believe that it's best to leave the future unknown. So AI tries to do that job by identifying certain patterns and by using those patterns to predict what the next event could look like. At some point, if you go back, the human desire to know the future goes back to the French game, which is she loves me and she loves me not. And you use a flower petal to count how many times and whether you land up with she loves you or she loves you not kind of story. So the AI also tries to look at, in some ways, patterns of events and see whether, based on the past data, if the same set of events were to play out, what the next event would look like. So that's in a nutshell. That's how AI tries to do. And of course, you would imagine that the task is not as simple because you got to study a very large number of data to arrive at a potentially right outcome. Some good examples of how AI is able to do so. Known factors is, in the case of diagnosing a medical case, to say if you have these kinds of symptoms for last so many years, you are likely to have this disease. Or in other kind of consumer industries, if you are likely to buy X, you're also likely to buy Y. We are all being trained in some ways to accept the Amazon recommendation engine, which basically says, hey, Tarun and Akhilesh, they seem to be similar people. And last time when Tarun bought A, he also bought B. So when Akhilesh buys A, he's also likely to buy B. So these are all bunching the events together and trying to find the patterns of what next likely event will be, because certain types of events have happened. Another great example of, in some ways, recommendation / predictive AI I'll give is when we all watch Netflix. Netflix, the moment you finish a movie, it'll tell you what the next movie you should watch. And the reason it is able to do is, again, analyzing my pattern and say, hey, every time Akhilesh has watched this movie, he's enjoyed it. And every time he's watched a different kind of movies, he's left them halfway through. So depending upon your pattern of movies which you watch completely, movies which you watch in one go, are high in the rank of your liking. And the movies which you don't watch completely or kind of watch with number of breaks are less likely in your. So that's how the AI system works. It gets lots and lots of data together, tries to put them in patterns, and then try to get to the next possible event. And that's how it gets this status of being the fortune teller of technology industry.
Yeah, thank you so much, Akhilesh. I think it's nothing but for complex, as I see. I think so many moving parts to it. This actually gets me to the next logical question to say, are these AI technologies or platforms that you talked about, they learn from the past, analyze data, become more intelligent as and when they gain information. And, that is why they are possibly able to drive certain outcomes, right, which may not otherwise be possible. Are the AI platforms that are available for the cybersecurity experts pure AI? I'm just using the word AI versus pure AI, right? But basically, my question is, do today's AI offerings actually meet the AI test, right? It's more like an oxymoron, right? AI meeting the AI test, right? Because there are so many marketplace products that we have. It's busy marketplace. So just give us a sense of how do we assess whether a platform that we are possibly looking at evaluating or buying meets the reliability test. How do we analyze and how do we get to a point of realizing that this is a tool that is possibly the best fit for my organization? Is it to do with the outcome, performance? There could be various different parameters. So I think, how do you see this evolving? And it's a litmus test for all of us CISOs, because as I said, it's a busy marketplace and we only have to buy one.
Good comment, Tarun. So let me just divide this into two parts. One is your question, what is really an AI and what it is not? And second is, how do you make choices? So there is a little bit of technical definition about what one could call AI in crudest sense. So this goes back to almost 70 years ago, and it takes us back to the World War II when Alan Turing was designing the machine to break Enigma. And Turing basically conceptualized a test which is called the Turing test. And the Turing test is designed to identify whether a machine can actually behave like a human. So in those days, a good definition of AI is if a computer is indistinguishable from human. So if you ask a human to perform a task and you asked a computer to perform a task, and then the outcome was given to an individual to identify which was done by computer and which was done by human, if you couldn't identify, then that means the computer passed the Turing test and therefore was considered AI. So that's like the outcome definition of saying a computer has to feel like a human and therefore not being sometimes as predictable in some ways or as rational in some ways. But if I were to go a little bit, the technical ways of what AI is and what sometimes is being sold as AI, I see a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So a lot of technologies today are being sold as this is built on AI. I would like to say that AI is a very broad term, and it's very hard to say what's included in AI and what's not, because it's very, very large. But if you were to talk about the two broad type of technologies, which is machine learning and deep learning, then it kind of makes our world a little bit more specific. So there are certain technologies which use machine learning or deep learning to try and solve certain tasks which are typically not solved using the computational program or just looking at the data. And I have seen that in the cybersecurity industry, there are many technologies which are being positioned as AI, and they may actually not be AI. But how does it matter as long as it does the job? So to me, whether a technology, let's say if a technology meets the Turing test, but that's not what I'm looking at. I'm actually looking at an AI to do certain things even better than human, then it may or may not meet the Turing test, but it actually does the job of what I'm expecting. So at some level, the discussion, whether it is AI, whether it passes the Turing test, whether it's right, may be a little bit theoretical. But in real sense, what we're looking at an AI in cybersecurity, a technology to do certain tasks, which it does at scale and it does with a high degree of accuracy. What I would like to say that actually cybersecurity industry is the one which is the early adopter of artificial intelligence. Sometimes it's rudimentary, so therefore we don't see it. So all of us have come across spam filters. So when an email hits a mail gateway and the computer decides whether it should deliver to the inbox or whether it should go to the spam box, is nothing but a machine learning engine working in the background. And as we all know that dealing with spam emails is a problem which was solved many years ago. Have we solved it perfectly? The answer is no. Have we solved it to a reasonable degree? Yes. Is the development happening? So right from that kind of thing, and that is clearly a predictive AI working to solve a cybersecurity problem. It is actually saying that, hey, whether I should deliver this email because this could cause a challenge, it could be a malware, it could be just a productivity loss for somebody, or I don't do it. So AI does the job of filtering, and then you can choose saying, hey, once in a while, I'll also look at my spam filter that I might have missed certain emails. So it does the job of filtering it out, which is some based on rules, some based on heuristics, some based on pattern, but saves human productivity and also saves us from malware. There are many, many, many such examples of AI being applied in cybersecurity, which we can talk depending upon the time we have today.
No, very lastly explained, Akhilesh. I think it's very clear that AI should be ideally suited to solve our difficult problems, right? It's very, very clear, right, in terms of the use case of what an AI platform needs to do for us. And I think while we talk about difficult problems, you rightly mentioned that cybersecurity falls into that category, right? It's a difficult space to be in. I think we've really talked about the attack surface, which is on the rise, increasing, thousands of devices per organization, hundreds of attack vectors, big shortfall of security professionals, right? And at the same time, I think since it's a beyond a human scale problem, I think it's important that cybersecurity has been the early adopter, of AI-based platform. And I think a very simplistic example that you provided of spam filters, right, is a AI-based platform or a technology that many organizations are already using. I'd like to probably now look at getting your perspective on how should an AI-based or an AI-centered, or I should say AI-powered cybersecurity management system look like for organizations. And I think here I would probably like you to specifically dwell upon how does AI provide new levels of intelligence to the cybersecurity teams, right? I mean, we're talking of various different aspects of cybersecurity like threat exposure, controls effectiveness, breach risk reduction, incident response, and I think communication to the board, right? So I think if these are the parameters on which you could possibly mention on how AI can actually come to a good rescue for these cybersecurity teams and the CISO at large.
That's a brilliant segue to say how it's useful to us and how we can take advantage of it. So you're right. The example which I gave you of spam filter is the most rudimentary example of AI being used for cybersecurity. But some of these examples which you talked about, let's say starting with threat intelligence. Now, as much as we want to stop things from happening when they occur to us, sometimes it's also a good idea to predict what can go wrong. So the threat intelligence models are actually helping us saying, hey, something else is going on somewhere else. How can you protect yourself? So it's kind of giving an early warning signal. It's saying if there's an earthquake, there could be a tsunami kind of story. So there are enough and more systems available today in the market which take the promise of using artificial intelligence, clubbing a lot of data, trying to find patterns and say, hey, if these are the kinds of events happening, what kind of threat does it pose to a particular organization? So threat intelligence is one of the classic cases of using AI for preventing potential attack. Second is doing the event analysis within the organization. So we all have lived through the SIEM systems, which try to correlate the event and give us insight. And now they are kind of going to another high level of automation with security orchestration. Now those are all turning to AI to say, hey, using the classical programmable languages, it is very hard to identify what will go wrong. But if we had the power of machine learning, we can identify patterns based on what the data which has happened. Third example I will give you is even understanding a single user behavior. So for example, if for every single day I log into my computer from my home and one fine day I log into my computer, let's say from a cyber cafe or somewhere else, the computer or the artificial intelligence system will be able to determine that it doesn't sound like Akhilesh, even though the person is using the right username and password. So it kind of mapping the behavior of a user, normal user, identifying the anomaly in that and using machine learning to find that. Similarly, there are many cases of when there's an incident which has happened, what is the next likely network segment which is going to get detected? So there are several examples of how organizations today can actually build, as you call what cybersecurity management system, which is AI powered. Doesn't mean that everything else which you're doing today needs to be thrown out. A lot of things which we do today are actually already AI. I'll give you an example of a very simple thing which is AI, but sometimes we may actually not believe. Let me ask you a question. Tarun, have you heard of something called completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart? Have you heard of this phrase?
Not really.
Have you heard of CAPTCHA?
Yes, please.
Yes. So the full form of CAPTCHA is it's a completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart.
Wow.
So this is
that's a big learning for me. In fact, I thought I knew CAPTCHA pretty much, but I never knew the full form of it. I think that's a great learning ever.
most people who deal with CAPTCHA don't, because every single human being which uses internet today deals with CAPTCHA, and doesn't mean that they need to know about it. But the history of CAPTCHA goes to I think maybe about 15 years, 17 years ago now, when I think it was Yahoo which was trying to solve the problem, saying, we don't want attackers to use bots to keep logging in to our system. Because if you remember, in those days, people could do brute force attack. Let's assume you're a bank and I just happen to know your user ID, but I don't know your password. So I keep brute forcing. Now, if I'm acting against you, there are good chances that I'll either break your password, or the bad chances are that I will lock you out, because after 5 attempts, the system will lock. Now, in both the situations, whether your password gets compromised or you get locked out of your own account, is a bad outcome for the consumer. So the problem to solve was that, how do we stop people from doing brute force attack or having automated bots to throw such kind of a challenge on computer system? And that's how CAPTCHA was invented, to actually separate. So CAPTCHA is a Turing test, to say that the person who's, so in normal cases, in Turing tests, we are trying to find whether the AI is actually an AI. Here we are trying to find whether a human is actually a human or not, and whether it's a bot. So this CAPTCHA is a great example of using AI to stop brute force attacks. So as I said, that there are many forms of AI which we have today in our system, which we sometimes don't realize. So if you haven't done, thank you AI. It's going very well.
That was very, very helpful. I think such a simple example, but I think sometimes we don't tend to realize that it's around us, and I think we're using it because it solves a purpose, but I think it solves a purpose through a specific means, which is AI driven, right? So I think very simplistically kind of explained, I think helps quite a bit. So this actually, we would like to understand from you on the adoption of AI in cybersecurity. As you said that, we are early adopters, no questions, no doubts on that one, but how much, right? And I think, do you see this trend picking up? I sincerely hope that, it is. Basically, we would want to understand from you if there are any studies that, possibly KPMG themselves may have conducted to see what do cybersecurity executives or the board thinks about adoption of AI in cybersecurity. I think some kind of insights on that part, please.
Yeah, as you rightly said, Tarun, everybody is hopeful that it will grow. I do want to highlight that AI in cybersecurity is already a very large and mature market. There are estimations which range anywhere between $8 and $10 billion right now. And it also indicates that this is one of the fastest growing segment within cybersecurity. So cybersecurity itself is growing very fast, but within cybersecurity, this is one of the fastest gaining importance, is the AI in cybersecurity. The reason it is happening is because the use cases in cybersecurity are plenty. The ability to adopt some of them is much easier than many other AI use cases in business problems. Because one of the things which we're looking at here, unlike the business problem. So let me just take the example of, if I were to apply AI in a business problem to say, hey, will Rahul buy the next big car? AI can predict with some level of accuracy, depending upon how much enough data it has. Now, whether if Rahul doesn't end up buying it, it's a loss to the company because they thought that Rahul will buy the car. But in cybersecurity world, I'm actually looking at the problem sometimes in the other way around. Will X event likely cause a cyber attack? Now, if I get a little bit of false positive, that's fine. Of course, if I get false negative, that's a problem. But I'm saying that the AI systems can be tuned. So unlike the business cases where the accuracy is a lot more important, here we are using AI to only improve the effectiveness and not necessarily being very, very accurate. So that's the first reason. Second is right from the the person who's working in the data center solving security problem to the senior executive, which is typically a CISO or the risk committee and all that, they all believe that the talent problem in cybersecurity is not going to go away in a short period of time. So as much as we can try and do automate, which is what cybersecurity is doing today, but as the topic of our conversation, it's beyond automation. So in my view, automation is a problem which we have solved at scale already, but I think it's the problem of creating effectiveness of preventing certain things from happening, which is out. So My guess is that it's the growth is anywhere between 25-26% year on year in some of these solutions. We are seeing a lot of new platforms being built. We are seeing a lot of new even appliance-based solution coming up in this area.
Nice. That's I think very very heartening to know that the adoption is on the rise. And I think many organizations are doing the POCs to look at what really works best for them, because I think there are so many tools that the organizations have already invested into. I think it's more of a wrapper around those tools which can bring about this AI sense, and this is able to help them, work on the predictive side of security, which is kind of lacking, right? You said automation. I think we have taken strides forward, but I think from the perspective of predictive security, I think there's some way to go, which is where AI definitely comes, as a solution. I think we've definitely talked about so many good things about AI, right, in terms of its adoption and the kind of feedback that we have with respect to its adoption by the cybersecurity executive themselves. I think now let's talk about some downsides in AI. I think we think it's not only about just the upsides, but I think we should talk about resources. We should talk about financial investment, because I think everything really comes for a cost. So I think my question is it affordable by organizations at large? We're not talking of large organizations, but small and medium-sized organizations as well put together. How affordable is it? And let's talk about some aspects of finances involved and resources involved. And I think how are organizations looking to tackle that aspect?
That's a good direction for us to do, because as anything which has got great positive outcome, there are always the other side of the coins which you got to look at it. So I would say first is there are certain use cases which are proven and tested, which don't require a lot of experimentation. They come quite affordable. So many companies can afford it. So again, going back to my example, spam filter, very affordable today. You don't need to kind of invest arm and leg to get it. It's a reasonably good use of AI and it can learn your email pattern. It can learn many things. But if you were to build a use case which requires deep understanding of your ecosystem and requires a great deal of data to train, I think the AI systems don't come cheap from that standpoint. Because the thing with AI system, you can never say it's done. It's always a journey. It takes sometimes really long to kind of get it. Third is that you can never be guaranteed of outcomes. So you can use AI to solve a problem. I have been part of several AI programs where we did not reach the required level of accuracy, and at that point in time you abandon that program, because there is no real thing of. So unlike many other classic technology problems, which it's a matter of time it gets done, AI, you may have to kind of pivot your use cases in that area. The next is it's hard to get skills and talent in this space. It's not that you can getting people to learn how to build self-learning programs is a skill which doesn't come easy. Having said that, there are significant developments happening in this area which are bringing the cost of development and adoption down big time. One simple thing which I would say is clearly the fact that everything is now in cloud makes it much easier. So you don't need to own a huge infrastructure to build AI programs. You can use cloud, pay-per-use, demand. One thing. Second is that there are a lot of researchers which are actually making a lot of these AI codes open source and available to everybody to use. So that kind of reduces the cost of start point. And then third is that, in my view, pandemic has also given rise to accelerating AI, because every data is now getting digitized. So take the example 2 years ago when we were all going to offices, maybe only 20-30% of your interaction with our colleagues were digitized. So you went somebody, you spoke to somebody, you met somebody, you did something, maybe 70% of that was not digitized. Today, everything which you do is digitized. So maybe it's the Microsoft Teams which are capturing so much of data about human behavior, which it never got captured. So just one example. There are many examples where the world is becoming digital native about capturing data. So in an AI, you need infra, you need algo, you need data, you need talent, and I think all of those core areas are getting better over time. But if there is one real downside which I do want to talk about, is the development in AI are not just happening for people who are working for the good cause. It's equally available to people with bad cause. So
Certainly.
I'm sure you know it, but many people will be surprised to know how much of AI-based attacks are happening. So hackers no longer have to work hard to write a program to attack you or create a custom code or something. AI is actually doing a lot of these attacks. So large part of the cyber attacks are actually AI driven. Large part of attacks are also being done by AI to actually fool the AI. Because if I have the machine to know that I can insert an anomaly in my code so that the machine on the other hand assumes that it's not really an attack. So there's a lot of development happening. My concern is that good people like you and me have a great resources available to us, but we also need to follow the governance and the internal sometimes systems. The bad guys have all the resources available and don't have to follow sometimes the governance. So I hope they are not a step ahead of us. So we just got to make sure that we remain a step ahead of them, because both sides have AI available.
Right. So thank you so much, Akhilesh, for this holistic, comprehensive view. I think let me just kind of summarize the last aspect that you mentioned about, our adversaries using AI, right? So I think AI-enabled response is necessary for cybersecurity because our adversaries, right, are already leveraging AI, right, to execute cyber attacks. So I think that was wonderfully kind of explained. Now, are there any specific, takeaways? I think we're almost at the end of the half an hour, of our discussion. So any kind of takeaways for our audience, please?
One last takeaway I'll have. I know we are short on time, but if you're watching this segment, I'm sure you enjoyed the conversation. But if there's one request and takeaway I have, invest time to learn machine learning a bit, because one, it'll help you build a safer, as Tarun said, an AI-powered cybersecurity management system. But also, they're going to be all organizations are going to adopt AI in every field: AI in finance, AI in sales, AI in service. And the more prepared and more knowledgeable you are as a cybersecurity expert about them, you will be able to understand and protect them, because protecting AI isn't same as protecting the classical technology. So invest your time in learning about AI. It'll go in the long way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akhilesh. I think just as a parting, few comments from a CISO standpoint, I think I would again, kind of urge many CISOs who haven't yet, worked upon, a kind of a roadmap for implementing AI in cybersecurity should work on something. I think it's very important to get the right use cases. Akhilesh, you have actually mentioned this very, very clearly, that I think the key is to maximize benefits by using the right use cases to accelerate the adoption of AI. I think we've got to train our cybersecurity analysts to be AI ready. You talked about installing governance in order to deliver some kind of a long-term improvement plan. But I think having said this, AI is not a silver bullet, right? I think any over-reliance on AI with poorly used cases can actually be an burden to any enterprise, and I think it can lead to unnecessary risk as well, which should definitely be avoided. I think with this, we come to an end of this session. Thank you so much, Akhilesh, for spending time and sharing your perspectives. I think it's been very, very useful for our audience, I'm sure.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.